Hey everyone, welcome back to Retire with Style. And I say welcome back because we're recording back to back here. We have Daniel Crosby as our guest this week and my co-host, Alex Murguia, PhD, who felt he needed to have that said as well. Daniel Crosby, PhD, both with their
I have
PhD.
arrived, Daniel. I have arrived. I'm going to tell my mom to listen to this particular episode right now.
Dr. Alex Murguia, PhD, Dr. Daniel Crosby, PhD. But this is a second part for us with Daniel to talk about his new book, The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning, which actually, Daniel, this is at least the fourth book you've written. I don't know if there's been more than that, but you've
It is,
had
yes.
quite a series
Yeah.
going back to Personal Benchmark that was your first book in 2014?
That was.
Great. So we're up to it's book number 4, The Soul of Wealth. That's the newest one.
Wait, why is it that Daniel doesn't have his books in the back shelf and you are prominently displaying all of your books in your back shelf?
Yeah, that's what it's all about. But he might not have known where the video goes on YouTube. I'm not sure if we told him that in advance. Otherwise, could have his books lined up everywhere.
There you go. Daniel just brought out the big gun. Nicely done, man.
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel, in reading through this, I'll just, I'll touch upon some themes that I found very interesting and take it from there, from your end. But the first one that I think is important, and this comes when we're speaking to clients. When clients come in, no one comes into McLean and say, here's $500,000, and in 10 years, I want more. And that's it. Right? And no advisor in their right mind is going to say, okay, yes, and manage it without any contextual base. And I guess by using the phrase contextual base, that's a more operationalized way of saying values and aligning what you want to do with your wealth, how do you want to spend in the future, and how to align it with your values. Could you elaborate on that? Because I think that's actually the most important concept for me in terms of helping people contextualize their investment experience, which is, all right, what do you want to do with this wealth? And a lot of them are just, I don't know, I just want to spend it. And then you begin to peel that onion. And as you get through the layers, you ultimately end up in aligning spending with values.
Yeah, I'll work that from two angles. I think most people's goals when they come in are kind of lame, frankly, if I may.
Yeah.
They're deeply mimetic usually. Like they're socially influenced, that is. It's like, their neighbor got a boat, so now they want a boat. Their brother-in-law has $1 million, so they want 2. Or
wait. Daniel's about 30 seconds away from saying hedonic treadmill.
Nope, not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. Definitely not gonna do it. I wasn't. No. So, they're socially influenced goals, though, and they're not necessarily very personal or very valuable.
100%.
Money is cool because, Alex, as a PhD, Alex, you know that Psych 100.
I'm really a side D. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. You know that Psych 100, you learn that people are poor reporters of their own behavior. You ask me, what do you like? What do you value? What's important to you? And I give you sort of a very righteous, sort of glorified retelling of who I am and what's important to me. Money really cuts through that. So if we examine our spending, I have one chapter in the book where I say, basically, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. You say, I love my family. Like family's the most important thing to me. Well, it's like, well, you left 10 PTO days on the table last year and you spent, $150 on vacation. So maybe not, So I think we can look at our money and it can tell us who we are, and it can give us a true sense of where we're at and where we want to be. And working with an advisor is a great way to get from point A to point B. The second thing that I'm sort of on a soapbox about is your money is your vote. You get more of the world's going to get more of what you spend money on. And so in a very real sense, the way you spend your money, if you spend your money in accordance with your values, the world's going to look more like what you want it to look like, right? Like
I just thought of it that way. That's awesome. That's a great That's a great thing to phrase. Have you ever heard that before, Wade?
No, but no, it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, every social movement. I mean, you talk about the the civil rights movement here in the South. You talk about the getting rid of apartheid. You talk about the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution. They all used financial levers to accomplish their means. I mean, that's what a sit-in at a lunch counter is. That's what a bus boycott is. And on a much smaller level, I take my kids to the farmer's market every week. And my kid the other day, I took him to the farmer's market and he was effectively like, Dad, why is this spaghetti sauce cost so much? He's like, look, this is 4 times as much as we pay at the store. And I said, yeah, it is. But I want to live in a world where I can take my kids to walk around a nice park on a Saturday morning and this local entrepreneur can. So I'm going to keep paying too much for the spaghetti sauce because I want more of this in the world. So I think, whether you're trying to make the world more like you want it to be, or whether you're trying to make your life more in accordance with your values, money has really valuable lessons to teach us if we listen.
Now, when you think, because I've done this, and here, let me know what I was doing. You buy something, and a few seconds later, the dissonance sets in. Like, oh, why did I do that? You find yourself buying it for the sake of buying it, and then when it comes in, it's just such a letdown.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Mad Men. Happiness is the space between getting something and that moment when you want more. There's a little bit of a, I don't know, whatever, some time period, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, right? You think that happens when you're not aligning spending with values? And then
Yeah,
what would that be?
I think it does, and I think there's something. I think there's something else at play too.
Here we go, Wade. Here we go.
No mention of the hedonic treadmill.
No, I thought I was gonna get taken to the woodshed here, which is totally fine.
No woodshed either. No, but we fail to make a distinction between owning and being, right? And I think a lot of times we buy things, we buy the tag Monaco thinking we're going to be as cool as Steve McQueen. Or we buy the Fender Strat thinking we're going to be as cool as Jimi Hendrix, or the car or whatever. And a lot of times I talk in the book about the psychology of this owning being distinction, and we don't make a distinction. You think, well, if I have this thing, I will be more of this. And we want to be younger, cooler, prettier, smarter, whatever it is. And so we buy something that we think is going to get us there. And then the bubble sort of bursts, right? The illusion is broken. We get the thing. We're not as cool as Steve McQueen. We got the Fender Strat, but we can't play like Jimmy, whatever. And so I think that illusion is broken. The other thing, Alex, is it's easy to idealize an idea, but things are inherently imperfect and prone to entropy, right? Your car gets dinged, somebody when the car is just an idea, it's perfect. But when you buy the Porsche and somebody hits it with a shopping cart, now it's not perfect. So I have a funny story. Like I consider myself a watch guy. I don't have any watches. I have been studying about watches.
Vicarious watch guy.
I've been studying about watches for 2 years, and I really into the hobby, know all about it, know all the different brands and the different stuff. But I know that the minute that I spring for my first expensive watch, and I will eventually, but the minute I spring for my first,
we'll see how the market turns out in the next pause. We'll see. Wait until the pause. Unpauses on this tariff thing.
See what the tariff on Switzerland's like.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I know some of the magic will be gone when it moves from being an idea to a scratched up piece of steel on my wrist.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, this goes back to the money. The other theme, I think it sort of evolves around that first one, this whole concept of money and happiness. And when I'm reading the book and what goes in my head is all these articles that you see like once a year about what's the salary you need to be happy, those kind of things. what are your thoughts around that? The idea around money can buy happiness if you spend it wisely. And then I'd love to get your take on that whole kind of how much do you need to make to be happy, and anything more is marginal utility.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, you'll know this better than most, but there's no blood test for happiness. So the research really hinges on how you measure it. And a few years ago, Danny Kahneman and Deaton came out with this study that was everywhere.
Exactly.
And I pushed it because it sort of confirmed all my prior assumptions. And the study found that when you measure happiness in money, it plateaued at about $75,000, which would be about 100 today. So it's up and to the right until you make about $100,000 a year, and then it plateaus rather aggressively, and it's kind of flatlines from there. Well, a lot of people like that idea because sort of the takeaway was, oh, good, like, it can buy you creature comforts, but it can't buy you what matters. And that's sort of true. But the way that they were measuring happiness was sort of physically heavy. Money's really good at fixing your toothache or getting you to the doctor or buying you warm bedding or a dry home. And that stuff all matters, right? The absence of that stuff will make you miserable, but an excess of that won't necessarily make you happy. If you measure happiness more subjectively, more qualitatively, they have people do stuff like write me a paragraph on how, like, Wade, how you doing? Like, write me a paragraph, just qualitatively, subjectively, how are you doing? What they find is that the quality of happiness in those subjective measures is up and to the right to about $500,000 a year. And so if we're measuring it more subjectively, maybe money kind of does buy happiness and just more than a warm place to sleep. But to me, the more fascinating thing was 15% of people in these studies are sort of impervious to happiness. And I think we've all met these people.
Wait,
Like, wherever you
let's just call them out right here. Wait,
come
no.
now, not your co-host, not your beloved co-host. But yeah, it's like 15% of people, it's just sort of decoupled past a certain point, and like it doesn't matter. Like they have other problems, and if they're chasing money, that's the wrong problem. When you look at spending it well, that matters. So we know that spending on experience is sort of well-trodden path. We know that that works. Another thing that I love is spending to get out of work you hate is really buys you a lot of happiness, right?
I was going to say for my clients where I was thinking about, I have to ask Daniel this, well, when there's a pause, and I think I just interjected, so apologies in advance. But many of our clients or people that are on their way to becoming clients, a common refrain is, I hate what I'm doing. How much longer do I need to do this before I stop because I can't stand it anymore? And ultimately, they hate what they're doing. If you break that down to its most common denominator, it ends up being time. They have no time. They're locked in. They literally have golden handcuffs. Where if sure they can go on a lunch, but if they go on a lunch for recreational reasons and they divide that time that they could have been working by their hourly, it's the most expensive. It's $30,000 lunch, and so they end up saying no to things like that. And so, but
Yeah.
after years of this, and I know first world problems, I get it, but after years of this, they hate it. They're absolutely just ready to jump because they've never, they're well past that 500,000, but they feel literally, to use a common phrase, a slave to the grind, if you will, and that just gnaws on them and gnaws on them and gnaws them to the point that they're just ready to walk no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, buying time,
Yeah,
effectively buying your freedom is one of the best uses of happiness. And it's one where people are sort of loath to spend money on buying time. But, I live in Atlanta, and, paying a high school kid to cut my lawn is like the best money I could ever spend in July and August in Atlanta. I mean, it's just, I'm very happy to not be out there sweating it out. And so, yeah, getting out of work you hate, buying your time back, being generous, giving money away, spending on experiences. I had a gentleman on my Dr. Michael Finka on my podcast, and he talked about some interesting research. He talked about if you spend it on a car, right? Like if you buy a fancy car, that tends to be short lived, the bump in happiness. But if you buy it on a car to join a car club, it's much longer lived because now you've got a place to go on Saturday and you've got some new buddies who share a common interest and you got some guys to have coffee with. And so anything that sort of furthers relationships are sort of the number one predictor of a life well lived. And so anything that you can spend that brings you together with people you care about is money well spent.
Daniel, what do you, if for financial planning, just to bring some numbers into this, for financial planning and for a lot of the work that Wade and I do, we make a distinction between, excuse me, essential expenses and discretionary expenses, right? And some people would say, oh, there's no difference between them. They're all the same. I don't subscribe to that point of view. I think there are levels to this. But I when I heard you speak at the beginning in terms of, listen, if you can't cover the essential expenses, the whole money can't buy me love kind of thing, just throw that out the window. You need to at least cover this hierarchy, lower level things. If not, you're going to have trouble. I get the sense you're making the distinction of the marginal utility when it gets into the discretionary realm. Once you've satisfied essential and you're getting into the discretionary, then you can begin to barter in terms of what you really value and what brings you the most happiness. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we have like hygiene needs, to use the shrink term, right? I mean, to paraphrase Gandhi, to a poor man, bread is God, right? Like if you're hungry, you're not worried about the meaning of life or friendship or love or transcendence. You're worried about eating. And so I think, until we get these needs fulfilled, it's hard to care about the wants. What happens, I think, for a lot of the people that, the three of us deal with, though, is, I'm going to say it, because of the hedonic treadmill, what things that were formerly nice to have now become perceived as being absolutely essential. And then they have a hard time making that distinction. And that's tricky.
Would you say these are nomothetic concerns or more idiographic?
I would not say.
Huh?
I would not say that.
No, I'm just messing with you. No, I agree. But it's not to discount, though, folks that, from a discretionary standpoint, from an existential point of view, they could have the same amount of psychological valence, from a emotional distress than somebody that's worried about bread to some extent. Or am I getting that wrong?
Oh, I mean, I don't think you're talking about the psychological valence of like big existential concern.
Yeah. Like, or someone that's, what shirt am I going to wear today? Oh my goodness, I'm going to go to this business meeting, and they begin to catastrophize the pros and cons of wearing the wrong shirt. I think that valence is just strong sometimes as, someone dealing with lower level items, even though, in the big picture, it doesn't really matter.
So it's funny. Like we seem wired for trouble. If you look at when this country was founded, 85% of the world was living in poverty. What would be $2 or less a day today? Today that number is 9%. And it's vanishingly small in the U.S. Over that time, since post World War I to today, that the average size of an American home has tripled. And with all this wealth and all this abundance, we're no happier, and in fact we're quite a bit sadder. So I would never deny the reality of existential concerns or sort of the modern malaise and modern anxiety. But it's like you inherit a new class of problems once you get past the needs. I will say though, there's upside to that, like worrying about what you want to be when you grow up, or what kind of person you want to be, or what your legacy is. That's all real stuff, and like that's worrisome, but it's maybe a better class of problem than worrying about where your next meal is going to come from. And at least if you resolve that problem, I think there's a big payoff.
No, I got you. In retirement, once you're retired, have you done any work around that? Or I know you're well read about pretty much everything, but when it comes to retirement, have you encountered any things that have caught your attention that people are worried about that they wouldn't be worried about from the accumulations phase of their career that may fit into this sort of subject?
Yeah, so if you think about the positive psychology research, right, and you think about just the PERMA model, right, like what makes people thrive, you have, these sort of these 5 or 6, depending on who you ask, facets of thriving. One is sort of fun and leisure. You've got work, relationships, purpose, and personal growth would be sort of your 5 categories. Most people who are preparing for retirement are super locked in on fun and leisure. They're like, I want to have enough money to go visit the grandkids and golf and go cruising, or whatever. And money is awesome at that. Like, money is wonderful at providing fun and leisure. But if you look at things like, meaningful work, strong relationships, meaning, being part of a team, and personal growth, work actually does these things very well. I mean, work actually provides a lot of those opportunities, and they're lost when we exit the workforce. And people don't plan for those other 4, tent poles. They're so locked in on the number and making sure that they can have the fun that they want to have, that they don't ask themselves questions like, who am I going to hang out with? Like, who am I going to hang out with? How am I going to continue to grow and stretch myself? Because human beings are wired for growth. Laying on the beach is fun for like the first 10 days, and then it's boring.
What beach are you going to, Daniel?
Yeah, well, see, maybe that's my problem. Just the beach. But
No, no, you make a great point, and Wade, you may want to chime in. I mean, what are the reactions we get? We have something called the Retirement Income Challenge, where for a whole week, it's almost like a juice challenge. We have Retirement Researcher, which is an online community, and we take them through 4 days of a retirement plan. And on the fourth day, we don't really go into the retirement plan. We say, we go into retirement and what's that look like. And the idea is you don't retire, from something, you retire into something because you're going to have a lot of gaps that you're going to need to fill. And wait, listening to Daniel, didn't that sort of bring up the items that are covered during that?
Yeah, it really overlaps that idea that there can be a honeymoon phase of retirement if you are focused on that leisure that you didn't have time to enjoy before. But eventually you get tired of that, and then you do have all those other purpose, passion, how you're gonna spend your days, relationships, things that if you haven't been investing in those non-financial relationships and personal passions and interests and growth, eventually retirement can become a negative kind of emotional burden once you get past that honeymoon phase. And another aspect of that too, with the focus on leisure and things, is sometimes people have hobbies in mind that they want to go back and do what they did as kids, whether it's learning to play guitar, whatever it is, kind of hobbies or interests that they've been pushing off for the past 40 years because they haven't had time. And finally, when they retire, they will have time. And then they retire, and it really was the case that they weren't all these interested to do these things anyway. That's why they've been pushing it off for the past 40 years. And they no longer have the excuse that they're too busy. And I think that can cause some real kind of psychological, I wanted to do these things. I had an excuse not to do it. I no longer have that excuse. I think I don't really want to do this. Now what am I supposed to do? Type of feelings. So there is a lot that goes into just thinking about how you're going to replace work in retirement.
Wait, are you suggesting that I won't actually write the Great American Rock and Roll album when I'm done? Because that's my plan. But
time to do that, right?
Existential philosophers talk a lot about freedom from and freedom to. And I think, to Wade's point, we often get very locked in on freedom from. When we envision retirement, we go, oh, like no more Zoom calls, no more board meetings, freedom from the tyranny of email. And like that stuff sucks. I get it. Like that's you can be happy about being rid of those things. But what are you going to be free to do? okay, now you've escaped your cubicle, and now what? And I think people spend a lot of time fantasizing about escape and don't always know what they're running to.
Well, but I think that's why in your book, I think you do a great job of banging home on the message, aligning spending with values.
Mhm.
Because at the end, and money and happiness, and get them to think about that, because ultimately it begins to sort of tilt their head directionally in the right manner. And where I'm going with this is segueing into a financial plan. Talk about that. You talk about that theme in your book, and so taking these two concepts in there, in consideration, I think that's the those are the primary colors that you need, if you will, to begin to establish and craft a good financial plan.
Mhm.
Now without leading the witness any further here, well, what are the, and obviously we're retired with style. We focus on retirement income planning, which is ultimately a financial plan around retirement. What do you think goes into crafting a good financial plan? That as discussed in the Soul of Wealth.
So there's certainly people who can give you a more comprehensive answer, but I'll
But
tell you,
not better.
yeah, part of being a good behavioral scientist is meta knowledge, knowing what you don't know. And I certainly don't know the whole answer to that, but I'll tell you where I feel like people get the most, um, where they fall short the most. And I think that's on like a highly salient articulation of goals and values. I think that is where it falls short the most, is that people just have these sort of boring tick the box goals, and we haven't always done enough as an industry to make those things sing and make them come to life and make them personally meaningful to the person we're trying to help. I know you guys do a good job of that, but I think as an industry we're still kind of locked in on the number and not the purpose behind it. And I think that's a big miss.
I think part of it is probably, I don't let you, I think it's a bit of a workflow issue where people think, a lot of advisory firms think in terms of efficiency, and they start playing name that tune in under 3 beats. You know what I mean? And so they're like, "What do you want? Okay, next, boom, 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 5 steps." We've had 2 meetings, and we're transitioning into them becoming a client. I think they get caught up in that rigmarole and they forget the essence of trying to actually help this person out. But continue.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I was at a conference last night and I saw Will Guidara speak, who is the executive producer of The Bear, that great show about the restaurant industry, and had the #1 restaurant in the world. And he talked about the thing that elevated his restaurant from where they sat nowhere on the list to #1 in the world, was taking every touch point in the client journey, the diner's journey, and elevating it. And he talked about things like delivering the bill. When you ask for a check at a restaurant, usually it's like, they drop it and say, "Have a good night," and maybe you get a mint if you're lucky. He talked about, elevating that and making that a special part of the process. I think good advisors do the same thing. They're not just trying to tick the box. They're going, wait a minute, like, let's have a deeper conversation about these goals and values. Let's spend a moment teasing them out and making them real and making them yours. And they're not content to just say, okay, tick the box, what's the number next?
Now, within your book, when you go into financial planning and what makes a good financial plan, at the end of the day, financial plan is not like a Randy McNally roadmap. It's more along the lines of like Google Maps or something like that, letting you know there's traffic here, let's reroute you, etc. How often do you feel? I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to this. Are values somewhat anchored, for your life? Is this kind of a trait-like thing, or or is there a lot of room for these values to change that would then necessitate rejiggering a financial plan?
I think that values remain pretty static, but the expression of them may change, right? And then so the attendant financial realities may change. So I think about myself, like relationships are always going to be a central theme in my life. But now I'm the father of 3 children at home. Soon I'll be the father of 2 children at home. I'll have a kid go to college, and then in a couple of years past that, I'll be the father of 0 children at home. So like, what do relationships look like in my life then? What are the financial realities that attend that preference? And they look pretty different. So I think that they're simultaneously enduring and dynamic, and that's why it takes a little bit of finesse on the part of a good advisor.
Got you. Now, one of the things to make financial plans go, or and frankly, just with what's happening in the markets right now and everything, is this ability to stay the course, having this financial discipline. And in your book, you use willpower as that kind of nexus, if you will. What do you suggest people can have in their back pocket to really give them that boost, if you will, of willpower? Because I'm assuming it's a concept that's easy to understand but difficult to actually implement.
Yeah, the willpower chapter was a lot of fun because it sort of blew up some sacred cows, if you will. I think that we as Americans tend to lionize willpower in sort of a white knuckle sort of way, just through, grit your teeth and through pure strength of will and, make it through the tough times. The research on willpower is a little different. It effectively shows 2 things. Like, people who exhibit great high levels of willpower are really good at 2 things. One is they've formed habits. The hard thing, whether it's diet or exercise or good financial habits or whatever else, they've really formed that, and it's become second nature to them. It's become habitual to them. So they're not white knuckling it through. It's just sort of a habit now. The other thing that I find even more fascinating, perhaps, is that they make bad things hard. They I over the last year, I've lost a bunch of weight, and one of the things that I had to do was just keep stuff out of my house that I didn't want to eat. I just had to make doing the wrong thing harder. And I got a wife and 3 kids with like endless metabolism, and I don't have that. So you have to say, like, look, you cannot bring the double stuffed Oreos in here because I'm crushing a whole sleeve. Like, if I
Gotta draw the line on hot Cheetos.
Yeah.
So,
The Cheetos. Yeah, man. If I see,
that's my kryptonite.
They're gone, right? So you just can't bring them in. So that's sort of willpower deconstructed. Make stuff habitual and make bad things hard. Stay out of the way of temptation. That ends up being sort of the unsexy DNA.
Yeah, sort of the environmental cues. I mean, there's work on addiction, right? When you're an alcoholic and I'm not butchering this, but effectively, don't drive home the same way you did previously if you were always stopping at the 7-Eleven.
Right.
To give yourself a 40. Find another route home. That way the cues don't activate, if you will.
Yep.
All right. And so with that, financial planning also requires discipline. And you go into delayed gratification. From that standpoint, from a wealth accumulation standpoint, we talk about decumulating, for retirement income. But what would you recommend to somebody who's accumulating and they go through certain inflection points that if they go this way, their plan, if you will, is it's going to become more and more tenuous. And so it requires a level of delayed gratification. How would you go about mastering that? And are there any studies of in the like that you mentioned in your book that kind of are indicative of, listen, those who can delay gratification over the long term have XYZ kind of outcomes?
Yeah, I think the name of the chapter is Delayed Gratification is the Ultimate Life Hack, and I'm going to forget all the chapter and verse, but I talk in the chapter about the myriad benefits of delayed gratification, from finances to health and sort of everything in between. It really is this sort of one key that unlocks a whole lot of doors. And I mean, you just see this trend, whether it's staying married or staying in shape. A lot of times temptation comes and looks pretty good in the short term, but the long term, it's not in terms of the.
Hang on, what gratification are you delaying if you're staying married?
Hey, man,
Wait a second. Let's unpack that one a little bit more. Forget the book.
Speaking to the people. I'm speaking to the people here. Yeah, so it's like a lot of the times what sounds good in a moment isn't good for
Yeah,
what's good for your short term happiness is not good for your long term joy. Whether it's a donut or the good looking person next to you on the plane or whatever it is, right? So you gotta like make those trade offs, and really it really comes down to Stephen Covey talks about having a yes burning inside of you that's bigger than the no of whatever you're giving up. So it really comes back to why. Purpose is a thread that runs through very many parts of the book. It's almost science fiction, like how powerful purpose can be in helping people make better financial decisions. And so getting clear about your goals, making them extremely vivid in your mind, and really looking forward to that future date is, I think, the only way you're able to get past the pain of having to say no to something fun you could spend that money on today, is having a bright vision of what that tomorrow looks like.
No, I agree. I think the genius of the book here is that you're taking these concepts, you're applying them throughout life, in all aspects of life, not just, financial planning related. But by the same token, if you take these concepts, to me, they're the essence of what makes a financial plan effective. Right, and this is with Wade here. Wade can take any number to the fifth decimal point like nobody's business. 30 years from now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're listening to this, Wade. What's your take? Because we talked about I'll look through my mastering delayed gratification, overestimation of your willpower. To me, that's staying disciplined, right? How to craft a good financial plan with regards to everything that we talked about, specifically with money and happiness. What's that equation, as opposed to just wanting more? What's that sort of balance, right? Where that fulcrum kind of takes place, and aligning spending with values. To me, you get this correct, this is where it's at, not necessarily taking something to the fifth decimal point. Now, I say that with you, Wade, who are, you're the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to the engineering of a financial plan. You're listening to Daniel, and this is kind of maybe bizarro Superman kind of thing, but what's your take on what you're listening to?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and the whole idea of delayed gratification that really aligns with a lot of the financial aspects of retirement, where short-term sacrifice can ultimately lead to longer-term benefit. And we see in the data these characteristics associated with delayed gratification correlate with longer lifespans, because healthier living, more education, more income, more wealth. And it's all really about having that ability to create that short-term sacrifice for those potential long-term benefits. And I think a lot of listeners to the podcast, they're seeking out podcasts on retirement. It suggests they may have that sense of delayed gratification, maybe probably more than the average person in the country. And that all aligns very nicely. And to balance it all out, though, as well, with what we were talking about earlier, it's not just the delayed gratification purely on the financial side, but making sure that you are investing in those non-financial aspects as well, because I think that is the area where sometimes the folks who are really focused on saving and their finances may be missing out on how to have that best achieved balance in retirement. So it's really interesting for me to listen to Daniel talk about those themes.
I was hoping you would say you come from the Neil Young, better to burn out than to fade away school of thought on delayed gratification, but I guess I was wrong, Wade.
I thought that was the Who that
was
they
it?
die before they get old. Or...
Oh, that's my generation song. No, I'm thinking, hey, my mind. I'm thinking Into the Black. Come on, Wade. Come on, man. Daniel, one of the things that I think is an interesting concept is risk. Obviously, the risk-free rate sets everything in finance. In financial planning, you have to have certain return assumptions, which involve risk. You have to have certain standard deviation assumptions, which involve volatility and the like. But those are numbers driven. Your book talks about risk, in meaningful endeavors. Do you mind sharing that with the audience in terms of how you view it from a soul of wealth perspective?
Yeah, one of the one of the clients that I had, it was actually my first client ever, taught me a really enduring lesson about risk. And so, Alex, I don't know how old you were when you started doing therapy. I was 23.
I actually was never a therapist.
Oh,
I lacked an empathy gene. I
well,
was more of a researcher.
research psychologist.
Yeah, I was more of a researcher. I had to be a clinical psychologist because that, it's just that sort of scientist practitioner thing. The only therapy I did, I always focused on assessments.
Yeah.
So I never did hardcore therapy, if you will. It was always assessments and certain behavior interventions, but not necessarily. I would never consider myself a therapist, if you will. I think you're the real deal in that sense, but I just didn't have it in me, frankly.
The world is worse for you never having been.
Yeah. I just focus on weed. I have one client.
He's my therapist.
So
we're on 100 and something sessions.
yeah, amazing. So my first ever client, I'm 23 years old. She walks in and she has 6 envelopes. And I'm like, what is this? Oh my gosh, what is this? I'm hoping some garden variety depression or something. And so she comes in and she's all her life, ever since she was a little girl, wanted to be a physician. She's finishing up school. She's like my age. She's finishing up school. She's applied to medical schools and she's heard back from them via these packets, but hasn't been able to bring herself to open them because she's scared if she opens them, she's going to get bad news. And then this dream that she's been working for her whole life is going to just crumble. And then who is she? And so I was admittedly kind of lost at sea for a moment. But, for somewhere toward the end of the session, I sort of figure out and say to her effectively, like, hey, it occurs to me that in your best efforts at managing risk, you are bringing about the inevitability of the very thing you fear, right? Because if you don't open these envelopes, you are not going to medical school because you gotta open them and tell them you're coming, right? Like you've got, if you got in, you got to open and accept. So I said, look, the thing you fear the most in the world is not getting into medical school. Guess what? If you keep on this path, you're not getting into medical school. And that was, that worked. And thankfully she got into most of the schools she applied to. I would have been out of luck if she had gotten bounced from all 6, but that worked that day.
A real therapist would have looked for the thicker envelope.
That's true.
Pick that one first.
That's the real yes. Let me hold these. Let me squeeze. And I see a lot of people do that. When I was a therapist, I came to term this emotional graying, right? Like people trying to take the variability out of their lives. And so they would say like, well, I don't want to be heartbroken, so I'm never going to fall in love. And like, if I meet someone I start to like, heartbreak's going to hurt, so I'm just going to keep them at arm's length. And I want to be an entrepreneur, but most businesses fail, so I'll never try.
Sounds like a self-fulfilling thing.
Yeah. And so I just think of that first client of mine so many times, like the thing that we're most afraid of is the thing that we are actualizing or bringing about in our life because of that very fear. If we're afraid of like, being insignificant or not leaving our stamp on the world, a lot of times we never try and then you don't leave your stamp on the world. So, yeah.
I mentioned earlier, and I used the term appointment in Samara.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with that story?
I'm not.
I'm going to butcher this. I'm literally doing this off the top of my head, but there's a merchant's worker that he's somewhere in, it's like a Middle Eastern city. I don't know exactly right now, right? And he's shopping in a bazaar and he sees like the Grim Reaper, right? And Grim Reaper's looking at it and he runs off. He just takes off and he takes a train or whatever to Samara, right? Or it's the other way around. He's in Samara and he takes off somewhere, right? And before taking off, he tells the guy, hey, look, I'm out of here. I gotta go. And he goes to Samara. Now I'm messing this up, but he goes to Samara to escape the Grim Reaper. The owner, the guy who he works for, catches up with the Grim Reaper and said, "Hey, you scared my employee. You scared him into going to Samara. What are you doing, man?" And the Grim Reaper said, "Yeah, I know. I wasn't scaring him. I was just surprised because I was meeting him later today in Samara."
Right.
You
Right.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so he self-actualized his own demise, I guess.
Yeah.
Again, I butchered the story because I'm literally doing it on the fly, but you get the gist, right?
Yeah, you got it. I just Googled it. Baghdad was the city, but otherwise
Baghdad.
you
All
got
right.
all the details there. Good job.
Yeah. I got it right? Okay. Right? That's kind of a cool thing in terms of kind of what you're getting at. You become what you wanted to avoid to some
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, Daniel, man, this was great on many levels. Any parting thoughts for folks with regards to your book? Because when I read it, I couldn't help but think, look, this is not a financial. It works very well, extremely well for the financial concepts and the like. But it's more than just that. It's just a book on almost like life and decisions and just how you should be viewing things and the like. Any parting thoughts for folks when they're thinking about, hey, is this book for me?
Yeah, my first my first two solo books, The Laws of Wealth and The Behavioral Investor, were really all about getting, maximizing your wealth, getting your portfolio right, getting your behavior right, so that you can, put together the best nest egg possible. And that's rewarding, that's important, and you should do it, right? But what I began to see is, I think like everyone on this call, I work elbow to elbow with a lot of people of means. And what I saw was that some of those people were incredibly happy and living meaningful lives. And some of them, despite all the outward trappings of success, were not all that happy and had left a lot on the table. And you see that, right? Viktor Frankl, I'm going to hopefully not mess up the quote, but he said, ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. And that's what the book is all about. Like, once you've hit that number, right? Like, once you've arrived at retirement, you've got your financial life squared away. How can you live a life of significance and purpose and happiness and spend that money in the best way possible? So it's only partially a book about money. It's really about money and meaning.
100%. 100%. I highly recommend it. What can I say other than thank you for actually bringing about that book? I know it's always a personal accomplishment to say, hey, look at me. Look what I've done. There's something about that. Wade doesn't ever let me forget that. But no, I think it's a great read, and I highly, highly recommend any listeners to pick it up. Thank you very much, Daniel. Really appreciate the time you've given us.
Yeah, thank you both for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you next time on Retire with Style.
Thank you, Pfau, PhD, Doctor.